Just before we go on with the third session, just a reminder to what I said at the beginning about Betty B. You should all within the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I think, be receiving an email about accessing our own AI assistant to allow better access to the vast information resources that ITSMF UK members have at their disposal within our website and member area. And that we've been building that up over a number of years. And it's a very valuable resource, but reasonably enough, people have said that it's been difficult to access the information they need. And our own AI assistant is being launched today and will give members and non-members to some extent much better access to those resources. And it's quite an exciting development. So, on to our third session today, and I'm delighted to introduce, as we move down the country to the University of Oxford, Ian Teasdale and Alwyn Collinson will be talking about how to manage the unmanageable. Over to you,
Right.
gents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Right. So I'm not that familiar with Zoom, so apologies if I do anything wrong, but I will try and share my presentation with you. So let's see if this works. Right, Mark, could you do me a favor and just confirm that you can see my slides now?
Yes, yep.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, there.
Right.
I've got the next slide view currently, but there's a clear view of the main slide.
Okay, just a moment. Let's see if we can change the view. Right. Now can you just see the slides?
I, I,
Still see
Hang
next
on,
slide, I
sorry, it's
think.
paused and resume.
you might want to try swap presenter view and slideshow.
Do you want to drive, Alwyn?
No, oh, okay. You're asking a lot. Uh,
I'll stop sharing and you
I'll
can
teach
drive.
me to do backseat driving, won't it?
No worries.
Sorry. Okay, you got to get me up. I got to get them up now.
Hmm.
Okay. Right. Sorry, just a second, please, everyone.
It
No
is worth
worries.
saying we did try this beforehand and it worked beautifully. So
Let me just. There we go. Okay. Can I ask if people can see that?
It's
Yeah.
coming.
And can you see it now? Occupying the whole screen.
Yep. Yep.
yes.
Getting
Yeah.
that now. Yep.
Mhm.
Well, thanks, Alwyn. So we're going to be next sliding you in a few minutes. So oh no, go back. You jumped the gun there. So apologies for those few little technical difficulties. So we called this presentation managing the unmanageable, but clearly if AI was completely unmanageable, we'd have no presentation, which was almost the case just there. So what myself and Alwyn will do is kind of take you through Oxford's approach to generative AI across the entire organization. So, Alwyn, if you can go on to the next slide, please. So just to kind of introduce myself and Alwyn, and Alwyn will go into a bit more detail about what his team do in the second half of the presentation. So I'm in Teasdale and my job title is Director of Digital Assurance, and I sit within a department within the university called the Digital Governance Unit. And what I do within that central department is I look after kind of all the process and governance around digital services. So that's kind of my bag. Alwyn is head of our AI Competency Centre, and he's the lucky chap who has responsibility for supporting the entire organisation with AI usage across every use case going. So Alwyn's got quite a tough job. So next slide, please, Alwyn. So just to kind of, I'm sure this rings true with many of you, but some of the kind of reality of AI use at the University of Oxford and the kind of the thing we're trying to put some management across. So the first thing to say, and you're all aware of this, is AI is everywhere. We can't stop people using AI tools, particularly in a higher education institution. People would ignore you anyway, but you can't control access to the tools. There are a bunch of consumer tools that people can get access to for free. So stopping it or trying to control it in too great a way is just a waste of time in our organization. Um, we're not an organization where we can exert central control over anything anyway. There's a lot of academic freedom. Departments and divisions can do what they like to a degree anyway. And the thing with AI, and particularly in a higher education institution, is the use cases are incredibly different as well. So professional services staff will be looking for one kind of use of AI, researchers another, students another. That one of the early challenges that we found is even when you try and put governance in place around AI, you think you've solved one problem and AI can do something else. So it's a constantly shifting landscape that you're operating in as well. And I'll say the final thing on the slide, but certainly not the final thing that we have to worry about, is the risk associated with using AI is very dependent on the context. So we've got professional services staff that might be using AI correctly or incorrectly around HR data or around data about prospective students, and obviously they're minor, so there are certain risks associated with that. We've got people in medical sciences that are handling huge amounts of patient data, and there's clearly a lot of potential for things to go wrong there. However, unlike kind of a traditional IT service, you can't put the controls in at the technology level because, as I've said before, AI is everywhere and people can use whatever AI tools and whatever AI models they want. So our approach to AI has been more around creating kind of guardrails and some sensible principles, and also building a culture of openness so people don't feel afraid about talking to us about what they're doing, because if you don't know what they're doing, you can't help them do it in a safe and secure fashion. So next slide, please, Alwyn. So sometimes the question crops up about, well, what tools should we be focusing in on? And that for us, we felt was the wrong question. We already had a landscape where people were using large numbers of different tools, and they're all good in different use cases. Some are riskier than others, some are better than others, some are focused in on particular areas. So we've got a particular bot that is only used by our law department because that's what it's bedded in. So we're not about focusing in on a specific technology. We're about looking across the piece and looking at kind of managing risks, because the same tool might be brilliant and low risk for one use case, but terrible and generate high risk in another. We've got these different use cases that I mentioned. So you've got things around use in teaching, use in research, use in kind of professional services. And so they've all got different things that we need to take into account. And then different people have different levels of need for support. And also we've got people that are like world leading experts in this. So if poor Alwyn tried to tell them what to do, they'd say, literally, they wrote the book on it. What do you know more than me? So it's about having an open sort of conversation and trying to understand people's use case rather than trying to drive them towards specific tools. All right, next slide, Alwyn, please. So what we've tried to do is create an environment where we kind of have a bit of managed choice. So we try to make it as easy as possible for people to use a safe route. And we do that through creating a culture where people can talk about what they're doing, and we won't shout at them, say, you've been doing something stupid. But what we will try and do is, if they're already using these things, go, have you thought about security? Have you thought about data residency? Can we help you? Have you used our enterprise tool sets, etc.? We try to give people good access, and we also use a lot. We also do quite an education piece about the kind of the assurance that you need in place for AI is no different from any other tool that you might be using. So kind of the way we do that is around providing a number of tools that have kind of got enterprise controls around them. So we've done a lot of the heavy lifting about we know where the data resides. We've got good contracts in place. We've got ways of monitoring uses, etc. Alwyn's team spend a lot of time around providing guidance and training and just being there to answer questions, whatever it may be. So we don't ever say, no, we can't help you because we know nothing about that tool. It may well be that we know nothing about that tool, but it's, we'll make an effort to learn. And so we're trying to do that. But although I've said we don't try and focus people down on specific tools, clearly, if we can do some of the hard work for people and say, well, if you've got this particular thing that you're trying to do, we've got some tools that we know are already being used in that space. So we'll try and give people as much support as we can, but we won't say no. And as I said before, one of the key things is about creating a culture where we do not say no to people. What we do is try and support people to using things in the right way. So that way people won't be afraid about coming and speaking to us because we know they've got things that they need to do. And it's about supporting that in a safe and sensible way. And as I said before, a lot of this is about education. Data privacy impact assessments that apply regardless of the tool that you're loading them into. We still need to go through, we've said TPSA here, that's our third-party security assessment. So that's what we go through with all cloud service providers to make sure that they're safe and good for us to work with. So again, we don't, people seem to think AI is a different use case, and it is and it isn't. There's the stuff that you've got, good work you've got in place now still applies, and a lot of it is about educating people around that. So now I'm going to hand over to Alwyn to tell you about some of the specific activities that take place. So over to you, Alwyn.
Thanks very much indeed, Ian. So, as Ian laid out, we have been driven through a mix of kind of necessity and a deliberate decision to increase the potential space of experimentation and learning to support a wide range of deployed enterprise tools. Now, I've just thrown up some of our kind of major enterprise platforms, and I think the important thing that we've been trying to emphasize, as Ian said, is the idea that we're creating essentially an ecosystem, a kind of variety of different safe, centrally supported platforms where we can maintain our knowledge of the technological frontier of these different platforms, which are moving, of course, really quickly, as you all know. Together, we think that these three platforms support a good majority, let's say 80% of the use cases that we're asked for across the university. So we're not saying these are the be-all and end-all. And of course, it is intrinsically difficult to say, yes, of course, there's a safe central managed space. In fact, we like it so much, there's three of them. So as you can say, we support ChatGPT, our Google Workspace, and Microsoft Copilot. As you can see, there's a kind of order of magnitude difference in the sense that ChatGPT has really found kind of fit at the university as a kind of everyday productivity tool. And I think what we've also seen in the last 6 months or so, as I'm sure many of you have in your own institutions, is a sudden explosion in demand for coding agentic tools, whether these are kind of, a framework that's supported through something like Codex from ChatGPT, from OpenAI rather, Claude Code from Anthropic, or the sort of agents you can build in Copilot Studio, for example. I think it's essentially a sort of similar area of saying that people are moving from using the tools directly to using the tools to build things which they then want to deploy. And I think, again, trying to keep on that technological frontier as a team and then disseminate that information rapidly around the university and disseminate that learning rapidly around the university has really enabled us to stay close to our researchers and our kind of frontier administrative staff who are really pushing the capabilities and the boundaries of what's possible with these AI tools. That being said, it's also, as was mentioned earlier, a cost challenge, which is where you see recharging so prominently displayed here. So I think the reality is that certainly towards the beginning of this year, as we started to see the taps on kind of really cheap inference for things like GitHub Copilot being turned off, we've seen a huge rise in our centralized token consumption, even though we cap usage of premium features in ChatGPT, and we only give out a limited number of Copilot 365 licenses. Despite that, we have seen our central bills with inference spend increase markedly, like doubling, or even quadrupling from when we look at this time. Well, certainly before we did our universal rollout, but it's going up and up. And I think that trend line is something we can continue, partly because, as was noted by a previous speaker, we've seen kind of fewer subsidized token usage. But I think also the reality is that with these new agentic tools like Codex and Claude Code, we're seeing an explosion in the possibilities, and that's leading to a lot of experimentation. No doubt a lot of waste, but as the man said, 50% of my token costs are wasted. I just don't know which 50%. So I think connecting ROI on these centralized platforms back to the amount of cost that's being spent is really difficult. Partly that's why we've embraced this kind of relatively decentralized environment where we've got a single central, well, as I said, three single central managed platforms. We also did test out administrative layers. So, for example, we did a pilot this year of Nebula One. I'm really interested to hear other people's experiences with that because, frankly, we found that it simply wasn't a competitor in terms of functionality when you compare it to these big central technology providers. And I think that is a real challenge, is that building an enterprise AI platform is, relatively speaking, easy. Getting users to use it and not, as Ian said, to migrate back to a huge pattern of shadow usage that destroys your whole attempt to centralize and understand your usage and your kind of ROI across the organization, that is much harder. And I think that my first response is that kind of, our very decentralized approach, although it may look a little messy, it is not, it's at least we're not throwing a kind of comforting blanket of saying, well, we provided this enterprise AI tool. I'm sure people are using that instead of their own personal accounts. I think that is unfortunately kidding yourself. That being said, speaking of messy, our governance diagram, which is, I have to confess, a little bit stripped down. I think in practical terms, a lot of our oversight and support for AI comes from two of the groups identified in the middle here, the AI Competency Center, as we've said, and the AI Governance Group. So our Competency Center essentially does... Oh, hello. The slides want to work without me. So as I said, the AI Competency Center, we work in order to try and support everything from the vendor to user. And I think that's another thing that kind of Ian mentioned in passing earlier, but I think it's really worth kind of stressing the degree to which, in our experience, every element of generative AI deployment informs every other element. So for example, the vendor management, which would normally be handled by a kind of procurement, senior negotiation level, is very closely informed by the realities of what token spend looks like, really granular features in our enterprise platforms. And because we're getting a direct signal from users through a lot of outreach and kind of user support that we do in the Competence Center, which I'll say earlier, I think that we are able to then give very kind of quick technical advice, not just on kind of what usage looks like now, but what it could look like in the future, where the demand for more capabilities is coming from. So that allows our vendor procurement to function. It also allows our governance to function. So the AI governance group that you can see identified here is the body that has responsibility for decisions that are made in those central platforms that I outlined earlier.
Dysmaxic. No.
But it's also the body that has kind of theoretical responsibility for detecting that more decentralized use that Ian mentioned. So, for example, our law school is currently doing a pilot of Harvey.ai, which many of you may have heard of, particularly if you have your own law schools. It's a sort of set of fine-tuned models plus an interface that's designed for practical use by lawyers. So it's a kind of very sort of instant drag and drop. This is something that's really useful for legal research and professional work. They're doing a pilot of that. Of course, that would be, it'd be sort of crazy to deploy it universally. But what we've tried to do is really speed up and kind of streamline the governance process, not in the sense of bypassing our usual governance, but simply of making sure that we in the Competency Center are working very closely with our existing information compliance, legal, information security, and cybersecurity teams in order to make sure that the hurdles for rapid enterprise deployment in a thoughtful way are being are being hurdled over, not bypassed. That would be defeating the point of the hurdling, as quickly as possible, because we think the reality is that if you do not enable and support rapid deployment, you will see shadow deployment instead. And this is a big challenge, not just for us as a decentralized university, I think probably in reality for all other institutions as well. Our AI governance group is a kind of, it's a bigger group which considers bigger implications. So it has education and research representatives and kind of what you'd expect. But what we also have is a subgroup of technical enablement. So that group actually meets every 2 weeks to consider a raft of features that's been requested for enablement or at least discussion from the central platforms. So, when ChatGPT released 2, 3 weeks ago, actually it was a bit more than that, but a bit more like a month or two ago, things like ChatGPT plugins for PowerPoint, ChatGPT plugins for Excel, we were able to look at those and see, do they fit within our existing frameworks? Can we analyze them against quite a long, but I hope sort of thorough risk diagram, risk checklist that we have, which looks at things like increased cost, increased environmental impact, interaction with the rest of our information architecture, and say, is this something we can turn on rapidly? Is this something we need to take to the main governance group? Or is this something that we can enable really swift, rapid, iterative pilots on? And again, having a single team in the competency center that manages technical management of these platforms comboed with that governance and that strategic support allows us to create, we hope and think, quite a tight feedback loop in terms of getting information back about the technical capabilities, which can then inform strategic imperatives. And that has enabled us to do things like turn on those plugins quickly and also create a waitlist of centrally supported AI tools, which are developed locally in departments. So if someone creates a agent or a particular kind of new application that's AI powered or AI generated, kind of the code is AI generated, maybe it runs through an API, something like that. They can bring it to the governance group and say, we have built this locally. The governance group, I want to really stress this, does not say yes or no, you may deploy this locally. There's ultimately a decision that lies with the risk, compliance and management of that individual department. But instead they say, is this something we want promoted across the university as an exemplar of good practice or as a tool that can be used by everyone? For example, we built an assurance bot, which essentially allows you to kind of run through a sort of standard assurance checklist for going through usual processes, but powered by a knowledge base and a model selection and kind of testing to be really finely tuned to fit with the university's own kind of usual processes, and one that's owned importantly not by central IT but by the assurance team themselves. And I think that's really powerful and dangerous element of AI governance, is the degree to which these tools are so powerful that they kind of enable the long dream of citizen developers, the kind of eternal promise of IT democracy. Not that we'd want it, but that is now a reality. And I think the reality is to get as quickly as possible, not to encourage people to do that, but to catch up with where they already are. And I think in that spirit, as you can see here, as well as supporting divisions and departments, we also kind of try and get involved with their activity. So we have sort of two teams of, as well, we have some administrative and comms and engagement staff, but we also have a team of research software engineers and AI consultants who go and try and work really closely with those colleagues who are deploying in departments to try and understand their processes and make sure that what they're doing is visible to that AI governance group, but also is linked in with kind of common good practice and is avoiding kind of setting up traps in our information architecture. As you can see here, we have an AI ambassadors network, which is gradually growing. I think we're at about 70% of university departments being represented now, but this is a voluntary network, but one that we've had enormous enthusiasm and activity and engagement with. Partly because I think people are really crying out for support and help, but also because this allows colleagues to act as local signposters, local trainers. We do train the trainer models with our ambassadors, but also to then pass on examples of good practice, examples of bad practice, but also to sort of say, these are the priorities for effective deployment in research or in medical sciences or in HR or finance, which allow us to then feed that very rapidly back into our governance network and to say, you need to support this plugin because it is going to enable a bunch of HR people to suddenly unlock huge value for their work. And I think that I will freely admit that, we're really privileged in Oxford in being able to throw this central team together. But I do think no matter where you are in kind of the institutional kind of size or scale, I think it's really important to think about, first of all, dedicating some resource, as little as one person, to the job of trying to have a view of end-to-end AI enablement and support, because the reality is it's exploding everywhere. And if you don't keep an eye on it, that is going to happen in an uncontrolled, but more importantly, an opaque way. And the second element, I think, is to really emphasize that there needs to be close connection between IT service help desk, between platform teams who are managing the work themselves and between the communities of users. So, for example, as well as our ambassadors network, we have our most popular Teams network at the university now is our AI special interest group, where which has I think close on 3,000 regular users now, and basically that's again trying to be transparent, but also be connected so that we see that good practice centrally reflects practice locally. So we did this AI tools rollout. I sort of already talked about some of the things there, but like kind of standard ticking the check boxes. But I think more importantly than what we did is why we did it. And Ian put his finger on it precisely earlier, which is about saying it's an attitude of transparency, public experimentation, and a clear signal from the Central University that the time has come for us all to understand the impact of AI, perhaps especially if we are skeptical or don't want to use it in certain areas of our practice. If we are not understanding that technical landscape, but also understanding the second order effects, the kind of knock-on impacts that AI usage, which is basically omnipresent among students, if no one else, is having on the operations and the work of the university. And that's why we think this kind of, unfortunately, no magic bullet, no single platform, honestly, very little technical monitoring, although obviously we could talk about kind of the analytics and the KPIs we're looking at around our adoption, but simply a kind of network and community-based approach to publicizing AI usage, and that's I think we've skipped past it. But one of the things we also really try and do is take a sort of, as well as that sort of more, I wouldn't say it's a stick approach, but that kind of more surveillance-based approach, we also take a strong sort of carrot approach. So, for example, our centre has, as well as extra subscriptions and extra usage tiers, which we give to our ambassadors network or selected pilot projects. We also have things like catalogues of use cases. We have a skills library for Claude Code and Codex that we're publicising. And again, basically trying to say, like, we can show you real practical implementations and training, whether that's through training or through documentation or through resources. We can show you real effective ways of deploying AI today. And while you're talking to us about those, perhaps you could tell us what you're already doing with AI, because I think that we're still in that phase where the expertise and knowledge of AI usage in the university is concentrated very unevenly, and we in the centre don't think we have any monopoly on that expertise. That's why we want to get in touch with these people in order to learn from their usage. Anyway, hopefully I haven't spoken for too long, but yeah, that's my points. I wondered if there was any questions from the audience.
That's brilliant, Owen. Thank you very much indeed. Just checking because there was some there for Andy. I don't think there were any. Yeah, I don't think there were any specific ones there on your session. But I think that's a really excellent view of where things are at Oxford. Did anybody have a quick question for Ian or Owen before we?
There's a question just come up in the chat there, Mark, about data privacy.
Thanks, Claire. How do you cover off data privacy compliance aspects, e.g. DPIAs?
I don't know if Ian wants to talk to this as well, but I would just say my point of view is that you shouldn't apply any less standards for data privacy to AI tools, but you also shouldn't apply more. You know, the existing frameworks for information compliance that we already have, nothing changes because we're working with AI. That's why we provide these centralized tools, which have got sort of framework DPIAs, which cover the kind of common use cases. And that's why we also say if you're using it for a new category of data that isn't covered by those framework DPIAs, you need to go through exactly the same process you would with any other information processing. So that includes, for example, if you're using patient data or if you're using data in ways that that probably people weren't expecting it to be processed using AI during collection, that's why you need to talk to your local data protection officer. And again, I think that kind of trying to place the agency back on the department really emphasizes that there isn't and can't be a one-size-fits-all answer for AI deployment. That being said, I think probably, I would say in common with the rest of the sector, I suspect there's a lot of sloppy practice around careful use of AI. And that's why we give these kind of, if you're using our central platforms that are protected by enterprise data agreements and data processing agreements, then you can't go that far wrong. And that's basically our kind of bare minimum. Stay in that walled garden. And if you go outside it, you need to start talking to your data protection officer.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, nothing more to add to that. Thomas asked a question about data and security breaches coupled with usage of AI. So I'm aware of one, and Alwyn, if you are aware of others that you'd be prepared to share. So the one I'm aware of, it was less about AI usage and AI shining a light on breaches that weren't there. So this came about as a result of people beginning to use Copilot, which is obviously tied into the Microsoft 365 environment. And we had a number of individuals who took it upon themselves to go seeing what they could find. And clearly, if things have been shared incorrectly, then that allows people to see data that they would have already been able to see before they got access to AI. They can just find it significantly quicker. So the way we've addressed that is clearly it's not actually an AI question at all. So the way we're addressing that is around one, contacting the people that own the information that's been flagged as being shared incorrectly. Obviously, if it required it, and I don't think it did in any instances, do the sort of data breach reporting bit to the information commissioner. And the key thing really is about creating better education for people so they're aware of the implications. Because as I say, it's not an AI thing, it's just you can find these breaches significantly quicker when you've got an AI tool looking across it rather than a human being. So anything else you wanted to add to that one, Alwyn?
No, I think that's exactly right, and I'm sure we'll see more of that kind of thing. I mean, this is exactly the same with, for example, probably people are aware of the capabilities of Mythos, the recent model from Anthropic. I'm sure the new models from OpenAI will be similar, and Project Glasswing that ran to kind of look across in enterprise security across the planet. Again, I think that people may think it's a fine or even a hair-splitting distinction, but I do think that we should try and, if not push back, then at least be clear around what's bad practice that's identified by AI, or as opposed to bad practice that's enabled by AI. And I think the reality is that AI has the potential to also look at security and data breaches from a kind of positive sense, a red teaming aspect. So we've certainly used our enterprise tools to analyze our SharePoint repositories and things like that, and preemptively find examples of oversharing. I see Claire has asked, how do you manage a researcher's request for a non-standard AI tool? So once again, what I'd say, Claire, is that our view is it shouldn't be a request. As Ian said, we don't actually have the authority centrally in order to clamp down on a researcher's ability, particularly given that they'll always say, of course, that it's absolutely essential to, it's funny, isn't it, how it's always absolutely essential. I've never had a researcher turn around and say, oh, actually, you know what,
I'll just leave it. It'll be fine.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think that's the reality, is that they're not requesting. And I would say this is probably the case at your institution as well, even if you are less feudal than Oxford, is that they're just buying, and it's so easy. And to be honest, a big challenge for us is to keep our keep our door as open, or at least as close to as open as the front doors of Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google are. So in other words, make the path for enterprise procurement as smooth and painless as possible, because the competition lies with them just putting their credit card behind the bar, and then it's vanished from our awareness. And I'd say that that means we have a general policy of never saying no to a tool, as opposed to never saying no to a use case. We certainly would advise against particular use cases. But I think there's also a fine balance to be struck centrally between having a reputation as the sort of police, which again is going to push people away. In many ways, I think you could think of this as a harm reduction strategy, where we're basically saying that the reality is unchecked and constant AI use in a completely opaque and distributed way. And our goal is to move the equilibrium as far towards effective, centralized oversight as possible without losing those people.
Yeah, and I suppose it's really interesting, isn't it, Alwyn? Because you say if you offer it to them, they won't go elsewhere. But if you don't offer it to them or try and make it so difficult, you are driving them away. No, that's great. Thanks, Alwyn.
Yes, thanks once again, Alwyn and Ian. Really, really good session.